So first of all, thank you everyone who managed to join us today. We truly appreciate that. We know that it's Saturday and not many people would like to spend their time on a webinar that is joined by some remarkable peoples like the one we have today. So thank you all. And what I would like to start with is saying that it is an honor and it's a pleasure to have these distinguished speakers with us. If you notice that it's an all-female panelist and from all walk of life, but they're all come together in a single goal, which is defending and speaking up against the injustices committed against the people of Western Sahara. We have three distinguished speakers. One, we have Ghalia Lehbib Mohamed Mbareck. She is a human rights activist and a member of the Sahrawi Commission against the Moroccan Occupation. She's from the occupied territories of Western Sahara. And we have Maima Mahamud Abdeslam, and she is from she's the Polisario rep or representative in Switzerland. She is the coordinator of the international organization in Geneva. She works and coordinates closely with all the civil society activities in Europe. So she's been very actively involved in the organizations in the pro-Western Sahara movements in Europe. And then last but not least, we have Isabel Lourenco. She is a Portuguese human rights activist, a researcher at the Center for the African Studies of the University of Porto. She is an international observer at the famous trials of the Sahrawi political prisoners. She has followed the conflict. She has followed the conflict of Western Sahara closely for over a decade, both in the refugee camps in Algeria as well as in the occupied territory of Western Sahara, and with the Sahrawi community in the diaspora. Isabel has published reports on the political prisoners, the Sahrawi women and the children and the students under the Moroccan occupation. Isabel have written extensively and spoke extensively about the conflict, about the injustices in the Western Sahara. And again, I'd like to thank each and every one of our speakers for their time today. So I will start with Isabel, and just to give us an idea of about the situation and as I know that she published very recently a report in Western Sahara, or the situation in Western Sahara concerning the human rights. And I will just throw a couple of questions there, starting with how did the United Nations and its body fail you as to monitor the human rights situation or in your reporting in general?
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me for this webinar. And how does the United Nations fail? The United Nations fail on every single level. There is nothing the United Nations are doing to protect the Sahrawi civil population in the occupied territories or to protect the political prisoners in Moroccan jails. So we have occupied territory with a unique feature in the world. There are no organizations that defend the human rights in the territory. We have a so-called MINURSO, the Mission for the Referendum of Western Sahara, which does of the UN, which has no weight whatsoever, and that was very clear when it was expelled some years ago by the Moroccan without any fallout for the Moroccan kingdom. They also are, their sole objective was to accomplish the realization of a referendum in 1991 to be made in 1992. We are in 2021 and there is no referendum. So the United Nations have inexplicably been able to navigate the issue and the conflict of Western Sahara, prolonging the stalemate of the conflict and being an active part in the attacks against the civil population, since they do not act in the contrary. This allows Morocco not only to reinforce the presence of settlers and to reinforce the separation wall that is now 270 kilometers long since the end of the ceasefire on the 13th of November after attack of the Moroccan forces of civil protesters in El Gargarat buffer zone where they should not be allowed to be, and even less to attack civilians. They have added 50 kilometers more, and so it's the longest active military wall of the world. What else can we say about the situation? The situation is horrendous. We have children that are denounced by their own teachers for not singing correctly the Moroccan anthem or for drawing Sahrawi flags. They are tortured. We are talking about children that are 11, 12 years old. They are put in the commissariat. They are tortured. They are sexually molested. Their parents, their families are advised to be silent, not present complaints to the United Nations. And well, even if they present some complaints to the United Nations tend to issue opinions which are not jurisprudence and cannot force the Moroccans to commit to their obligations. So how can we get out of this situation? It's a situation that was going to happen. It exploded. The ceasefire ended. It could not be in any other way, because you cannot stay silent continuously when you see your children, your wives, your mothers being attacked on a daily basis. When you see that you have no hope, no future, no employment. When you see that the settlers receive all the employments that are available. When you see that your natural resources are plundered. When you see that your country is used as a passage for narco trafficking. So this is what the United Nations has allowed to continue and to be reinforced for the last 4 decades, unfortunately.
Thank you. Appreciate the response. I have another question for you, and this will be actually for both of you, Isabel and Ghalia, about your own experience directly. You've been involved in, especially with the trials of the political prisoners. You've been writing reports. You visited Morocco a couple of times. You faced Moroccans and their basically treatment to you directly. And I have a question in regards to that. Tell us about your experience facing directly the Moroccan occupation and suffering basically afterward from their treatment to you as an international observer who is there solely to report on the situation.
Well, the Moroccans do not welcome me. That is a fact. I was expelled in 2015 and I was expelled in December 2019. Both times I entered Western Sahara, I entered Laayoune, because there are some legal differences between not entering, and then being expelled and so on. In my case, both times it were abductions, because they basically put me in transport against my will after they stamped my passport entry in Laayoune. Well, in my last experience in 2019, they left me, forced me into a shared taxi with unknown people and left me at 4 o'clock in the morning in the middle of Morocco with no means to get anywhere. So this is they don't want us to enter, and then when we enter, they try to make our lives as miserable as possible, which is actually not very bright, since it only adds one report more in one violation more against their actions. Because if I would come in, I would observe, I would make a report, probably nobody would even give it much thought. The fact that they expel me like this, although I always have before I have contacts with my Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with my consulate, I inform the United Nations, I inform the European Union about my intentions. I don't enter under false pretexts, and I respect entry law of the Moroccan law. So there is no reason whatsoever to expel me, and that is the fact that shows that it's a political expulsion and nothing else. It's a way to make us silent. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. During the trials, it was very difficult to enter several times. Although I had some support of my embassy, which differs from embassies from other parts of the world. And during our stay in Western Sahara in 2014, I was there 10 days. We are constantly monitored, followed, photographed, filmed, interrogated. In 2014, I was interrogated with 2 Sahrawis next to me being tortured. So it's quite incredible how all this is possible. And once again, I have to add that MINURSO, the mission on the ground from the United Nations, is well aware of all of this and is observer. It observes all this. So this is also a situation that has to do with the inaction of the United Nations once again, and with the freedom that is given to Morocco to act in a complete illegal way.
Thank you. So I don't want to drive this just out of questions. So please, if you have anything, I wanted to just a summary of the situation in general. And Ghalia, if you don't mind giving us just a summary of the situation living under the Moroccan occupation, what do you think is worth talking about or bringing the world attention to?
Hello. Good afternoon to all. Thanks in advance for me. The human rights situation in the occupied territories is an embodiment of what can be described as unreal disaster, and has reached in alarming cities. The occupied cities in Western Sahara suffer from several problems and widespread human rights violations due to the ongoing operation and the brutal crackdown perpetrated by the Moroccan regime. Sahrawi houses العيون داخل Mara and Bujdur are currently surrounded by the police forces, be it in uniform or plainclothes police, and where they must basic rights are violated. For example, the house of Sahrawi activist Sultana Khaya is an example of such a siege, and which has lasted for more than 4 months. Sultana Khaya and her family are placed under an illegal house arrest. She and her family has been violently and brutally attacked many times, and there were attempts to raid her house on several occasions. Human Rights Watch has issued a press release in this regard and enraged rebels about her safety as well as that of her family and their visitors who were trying to break the siege and to support them. The Sahrawi civilians under siege and deprived of their rights of movement and expression, as well as of their moral and physical security. Uh, Mina Ba'li and Hassan Nadwahi are also another vivid example where retaliation against Sahrawi activists has reached its peak. Hassan Nadwahi was transferred away from his family to Bushdur, and his wife Mina was fired from her job. Their house in La'yun remained under siege and under constant surveillance. Mina was attacked many times, and she suffers now from a broken arm, while Hassan now spent weeks and months away from his family as he was banned many times from leaving Bushdur to visit his family in La'yun. He also remains under constant surveillance at home and at work. This policy of aggression and oppression did not stop here, but it also affected job opportunities where Sahrawi activists and those calling for the self-determination rights are often silenced and threatened by many means in the hands of the Moroccan authorities. Many of them either lost a job or their salaries are, are cut off. Another example of this would be Bakalina Bali, who was transferred to work at the city of the port, Marsa City, and she is now forced to commute every day to attend work. She is a mother of five children and a dedicated wife who has to take care of her sick husband. She got this job as part of the reconciliation and the equality initiative, a compensation of the long past years of imprisonment and isolation in the late 80s and the early 90s. Now she under the constant threat of losing her job if she does not comply to the wishes of the Occupy forces and washed her hands, uh, her hands of activism and advocacy. This malpractice relates more the crimes than all violation of human rights. All the occupied Sahrawi cities witness a record of illegal assassinations. A good illustration would be the cause of the young Muhammad Salim al-Faqir, known as Fahim, who was assassinated and placed in a morgue at the La'yun hospital in an attempt I'm sorry, in an attempt to hide the real crime and thus hiding the evidence of torture and homicide. Other fallen victims of occupation are Ibrahim Seika, Badri Boujem'a of the young Sabah Uthman, who went out to celebrate the victory of the Algerian selection during the CAN and was run down by a Moroccan police vehicle. The recent upsurge human rights violation in the occupied cities of Western Sahara has augmented dramatically since the collapse of the ceasefire agreement on November 13th, 2020. It seems that is the retaliation against Sahrawi civilians and namely against the Sahrawi activists in another act of war and is in violation of the Geneva Convention, the law of the occupation, and the international humanitarian law. Sadly enough, the international community remains silent and not moving a finger to end this long overdue occupation. Even international institutions such as IRC, International Red Cross, are complicit of such an occupation and aggression, as they did nothing to condemn or to stop these violations. The IRC recently visited Laayoune and Dakhla, but only met with the Moroccans with whom it organized the wall visit. Sahrawis were not on its agenda and thus only listened to the voice of the aggressor or the occupier. Morocco also, in this regard, still continue to imprison Sahrawis under false accusation and rather trumped up accusation. My colleague here, Isabel, can talk in length and in full detail about this. Sahrawis cannot establish or found their own associations. And as Moroccan regime would ban any pro-self-determination associations from existing, all Sahrawi associations work clandestinely and without a legal cities. This proves to be a slight problem when reporting or dealing with international bodies, or when trying to get credibility or funds from foreign institutions or establishments.
Thank you, Ghalia. We appreciate all the information that you unpacked. There's a lot of points there that get covered that almost answered all the questions that I had. I will give the floor to Maima if you have anything you'd like to share with us, and we will then go back through the questions. Thank you, Ghalia. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for my two colleagues who really has summarized the dark situation that Sahrawi people are living under occupation. First of all, I want to remind everybody the legal status of Western Sahara. Western Sahara is a non-self-governing territory listed in the United Nations with no administrative power, because Spain has decided to leave and Morocco has no legal status to impose anything on the Sahrawis. All the activities, political or human rights, that Morocco are exercising right now in Western Sahara are illegal. Morocco has no sovereignty on Western Sahara to impose anything. And all the organizations, CNDH included, political parties, organizations, Red Cross, Moroccan Red Crescent, all these organizations in Western Sahara are violating the international law, and it's illegal. So the fact that Western Sahara does not have administrative power recognized because de jure one Spain has withdrawn in 75 and Morocco is not recognized, there is an empty, jurisdictional emptiness that must be filled by the international responsibility. Who is the person who is in charge of protecting the Sahrawis? Theoretically, it's the United Nations, because Morocco has no power to protect us because they are the occupying power, and Spain they have decided to leave their responsibilities. So the UN has failed the wishes of the Sahrawi people to be protected, has failed the expectation of the Sahrawi people to reach a peaceful solution in arriving to a self-determination. Remember that the Sahrawi people has given to the United Nations 29 years of peace process, failed peace process held by United Nations, Mission des Nations Unies pour le référendum au Sahara Occidental. This mission has been created to allow the Sahrawi people to vote in 2 years. And the persons who are allowed to vote are the persons that Spain has left in the census in 74. So the persons entitled to give an answer for the future of Western Sahara are in this list. Right now, we are talking about them and their relatives. I mean, sons and grandsons. A lot of them maybe have died, but the wish of the Sahrawi people to be independent has not died. And the resistance, it's continued inside the territories, outside the territories, in the courts and in the war now, since 13 November. So what I see here in the UN is that Morocco has corrupted the system, corrupted the mechanisms, corrupted the procedures. For example, I will give one example. In the Examen Périodique Universel, Universal Periodic Review, it's an exam that all the countries every 4 years got it. And normally, this Examen Périodique Universel should not evaluate Western Sahara under Morocco sovereignty, because for the UN, Western Sahara is non-self-governing territory. But the system is so corrupt that they accept the report that is presented by Morocco as it is, Western Sahara as it is part of them. The silence and the complicity of the system is the one that has reached us to this situation. Other question very important is that why the UN mission in Western Sahara is the only mission who has not, one of the only missions who has not the protection of human rights. It's because of France in the Security Council. Remember that France is protecting the interests of Morocco. For us, for example, Morocco is just another province of France, like other 14 countries, African countries, who really didn't reach the independence, are still right now, they have no independence in their political decisions or in their resources. So France is still some kind of the guardian of these countries. And that's why we see this horrible corruption in African Union, in United Nations, because it's France who's really messing around and no one doing nothing. What it's most sad is that the fact that Western Sahara, it's a non-self-governing territory, the colonization, it's a responsibility of all the countries who belong to the United Nations. And what we see is that there are only 5 countries who are making a monopoly of Western Sahara, and they call themselves friends of Western Sahara. Myself, I call them the enemy of Western Sahara. They are UK, France, USA, Spain, and Russia. So they have took the responsibility of all the countries by themselves, and they have driven away the lack of other countries to participate in this political situation. And what we arrive is that the exceptional situation that the Sahrawi people are living, no one is defending them loudly. No one is defending the plunder of our natural resources. Why, for example, no one is vocal to do the same question that they have done with Namibia, with Timor-Leste. There was some kind of political will from all the states, and they have created the commissions to protect the people, to protect the resources until they get to independence. And now we see that everyone has left behind the Sahrawi people. And now, when we see Madame Bachelet, blah, 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 we leave no one behind. Actually, the Office of the High Commissioner has just become, for me, from my point of view, another tool of occupation. Their silence of the atrocities that Morocco is doing to my people is unforgivable. And we cannot forget it and we cannot forgive it. I'm sorry for my English. And other question, very important, is how the European Union and other bigger actors are trying to normalize the occupation. And this is very dangerous. And thanks God, we still have the courtrooms that they are very democratic and they are ruled by the international law, and they are still putting everybody in its place. But the plunder continues until today, and the Sahrawis continues to be left behind, unfortunately, until today. I'm ready to answer more questions if you have. And just I want to tell that the Sahrawi people is a peaceful people who not deserve to be treated like a collateral damage, that the natural resources should not be very much more important than the life of the Sahrawi people. And Sahrawi people must be considered as a state of security and peace for the people of North Africa. Remember that the conflict of Western Sahara has really touched the life of millions of persons in North Africa, not only Sahrawis. I'm talking about Moroccan, Algerian, Malis, Mauritanian, everybody. It's touched by this conflict. So it's time to give the people to the right to choose what they want. We are not against any kind of solution, but we are against the imposed solutions. We, the Sahrawis, should not be an exception for the implementation of international law. All right, we are going to fight for them until the end. And we're only going to respect what the Sahrawi people decides. If they decide independence, integration, or any kind of future they want to decide for themselves.
Thank you, Maima. There is a question for you while you have the floor. It is, can you tell us about the work of the reporters and the working groups vis-a-vis the human rights situation in Western Sahara? I think you are muted.
There is actually, we are very lucky to have with us Isabel Lourenco. She actually has a lot of interaction with this group and also other actors. We have a lot of friends, lawyers, organizations, Sahrawi organizations, political organizations who are interacting with these mechanisms and these special procedures. And they're trying to take their attention by presenting them complaints, reports, being participative for the question of Western Sahara. But there is something I want to say here. I don't know if I can say it. That what's happening in Western Sahara, a lot of it still it's hidden. A lot of people, Sahrawi people who are beaten, for example, they don't present complaint to the international organizations. So what we receive here, it's a very few amounts of complaints that's not going to reach the attention of the international committee, for example, to create a mechanism. It's not what's happening in Western Sahara has not arrived, for example, like what is happening, I don't know, in, I don't know, I don't want to name a country, for example, Myanmar. I'm just telling like this. So we are hundreds of cases, for example, between disappearances, political prisoners, people who has been tortured, but there is a lot of violations that are still unreported. And actually we have lost a lot of militants because Morocco has put so much fear in the life of the Sahrawis that they think that any interaction it's going to put them in jail. They are afraid to denounce Moroccan state. They are afraid to just go out to the street. They are afraid to work. They are afraid of everything, but they don't complain about what they have going through. So there is a lot of lack of conscience in our people about that the Sahrawi people should not interact with the national organizations, Moroccan national organizations in Western Sahara. We have nothing to do with them. They are illegal. So the Sahrawi people, if you have problems with the Moroccan authorities, you have go to the UN. You have submit your complaint if someone beating you, or if someone take your house, or if someone put you in jail or whatever. So we have nothing to do with the national organizations. Morocco are illegal in front of the international law, in front of our eyes also, because we see them as occupiers. So we try actually to not treat them and to not give them no kind of legitimacy.
Thank you. And just to stress on that point, the fact that the organization founded by the Moroccan government generally to persuade or to give the world or the international community a fake kind of reporting on the human rights violations in the ground. The people of Western Sahara should be reporting that violation to the people, to organization that is either a Sahrawi or a non-Moroccan. That's simply the way to go forward. However, one of the points that Ghalia mentioned earlier is that there is a restriction, or even the Moroccan government and the Moroccan occupation is preventing the Sahrawis from forming their own organization, let alone trusting their reporting on the human rights violation perpetrated by the Moroccan regime. So thank you for that, Maima. We appreciate it. The other question I have here for Isabel is, can you tell us a little bit about the situation of the political prisoners and about their trial, especially the Gdaimze group, as you worked very closely with that group? Thank you.
We cannot hear you.
You are muted, Isabel.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? I will answer, and I will start by answering also the last question you made to Maima, because they're interlinked. And I was observing the Gdaimze camp. That was a camp from dozens of thousands of Sahrawi in the outskirts of Laayoune in 2010, which were protesting against their denial of their social, economical, and political rights, and which was brutally dismantled 1 month after in November. The day of the dismantlement, Aminata Haidar, the human rights Sahrawi human rights activist, was actually at my place, and we started to denounce the situation in Portugal. From this dismantlement, there were hundreds of people who were imprisoned, tortured, temporarily disappeared, etc. From this group of people who were in prison, remains a group of 19 now in prison. Before, there were 24. In 2011, the 24 made a hunger strike to release Ayubi. This was one of the accused who was in such a dire situation due to the violence of the torture that he was released, provisionally released by the Moroccan authorities. These men were abducted to Moroccan prisons, which is against humanitarian law, and had a trial in 2013, a military trial, which is completely illegal since civilians cannot be tried in a military trial. The military trial was a farce. There were no proofs whatsoever, except the ones produced by the police themselves and the confessions obtained under extreme torture. When I say extreme torture, I will tell you only of one of them. That was the introduction of light bulbs, sodomy with light bulbs of one of the prisoners, who had light bulb introduced into his anus. They cracked, and it was another one and another one and another one. This happened in 2010. In 2013, I was sitting in front of this accused. He was standing, so I only saw his backside, and he was still bleeding. He had continuously bleed for 7 years. So after 7 years, he was actually, after the second trial in 2017, he obtained the surgery due to the actions of his defense lawyer, Maître Follet, and the successive complaints that were registered. However, in 2013, and Maima can vouch for this, I was amazed at the lack of intervention from the international community to defend this man, and especially not to address the issue of the torture they suffered. So I went to the UN, to Geneva, and tried to present complaints of this man to the Special Rapporteur of Torture. At that time, it was Juan Mendes. The whole process is made not for countries like Morocco. The whole procedures of the special rapporteurs, of the special mechanisms are projected for countries like Sweden or Switzerland. They include the filling out of forms that are not being filled out in Arabic because afterwards they have to be translated, and the translators are mainly Moroccan, and so on and so forth. So we have a multitude of steps. First, the political prisoner has to know that he has to fill out form A/B/C45678 in French or in English, and he has to name, and so on and so on and so on. And then there are questions like I had to answer some weeks ago. Is this the cell? You say the cell is 5 square meters. Does it mean it's 3 meters by 2 or 2.5 by 2.5? What the heck? What's the point of this question? So in 2013, I delivered the first complaints, which took me 48 hours to present. Why? Because in the reception, there were Moroccans, and they simply did not let me deliver the complaints. It's a very simple thing, but that shows the difficulties that we have. The second trial in 2016-17 was after these complaints and the actions of Special Rapporteur Juan Mendes, and shortly after the visit of the working group of arbitrary detentions, who saw all the prisoners except the one I just mentioned, Abdel Laroussi, who was tortured with the light bulbs. His physical state was such that he was not presented to the working group. The wife of Mr. Namaz Fari, one of the prisoners, therefore had the help of an association and was able to present a complaint to the Committee Against Torture, which actually the only human rights mechanism inside the UN mechanisms that has some kind of power over Morocco. Why? Because there are not opinions but decisions issued. The working group of arbitrary detentions published decisions, while the Committee Against Torture actually produces decisions, and not opinions like the working group. What does that mean? That the processes are very lengthy. They can take 3 to 4 years. Now with the COVID, it's even worse. We have several cases there. So until the decision is reached, it takes a long time. However, in the Grenizi case, the lawyer requested interim measures. This means urgent measures that are granted when the committee believes that the lives of the prisoners are at risk. All the interim measures requested were granted. Morocco does not respect them, however. But that shows, by the way, the prevention mechanism for torture in Morocco is the CNDH, which has no judicial independence since most of the members were appointed by the king himself. And that's not me saying that it's Amnesty International. So these procedures are very lengthy. The situation of the political prisoners now, because the second trial was a farce, exactly like the first one, they put an accused in a chair with terrorism written on it. They forced people to sign blank pages in front of every observer. no norm, no rule of a just and fair trial was actually followed. Since the end of the trial, since 2017, the prisoners who are now in prison for over 10 years continue to be tortured. For what? I don't have a clue. Why do you torture a person that was sentenced to life? Why do you sentence a person to life, put them in prolonged solitary confinement, so this person has no contact with nobody, has no access to any human interaction, no stimulant, and then you torture him again and again? Why? For what? What is the reason to do that? We have Abdallah Abaha now 23 days missing. We don't know if he's alive or dead. We don't have any news about him. We have Mohamed Lamin Hadi, who is the most known case at the moment, who is, his last contact with the family was 22 days ago. And 22 days ago, he was for 43 days in hunger strike. So we don't know since then if he's still in hunger strike. If he would be still in hunger strike, it would be now 67 days of hunger strike, which is highly unlikely since his health conditions were abhorrent before. So we don't know if he's alive or dead or alive. We have in the same prison, because all of these three prisoners are in Tiflet 2, is also known as Guantanamo of Morocco. So we have these three Khada, who also made a 43-day of hunger strike, and Abaha made a 44 days of hunger strike. So in the last 3 years, and Hadi is the most recent one, they made long hunger strike with the only request to be transferred to another prison, saying that the other prisons are not much better. They are less worse or less horrendous. They're not better. We have the same situation in Ait Melul and Busakarn. They have in Busakarn, they also do not call for several days, for over 2 weeks. And in Ait Melul, we have Mohamed Bourial, who made a protest for 48 hours this last week, because he has not even a mattress or a blanket on the floor. Abdallah Baha was menaced by death by the prison director. And so that you can have an idea, they are forced to strip whenever the guards want. Their food is thrown on the floor, and they have to lick it up like dogs when the guards want. So it's a continuous humiliation and torture with added prolonged solitary confinement in a COVID crisis situation, which is even worse. The rest of the political prisoners that are not from the Denizli group suffer the same. Their sentences are less extensive because the Denizli group has between 20 years and life imprisonment. So what can we say about this? Would this be acceptable if it would happen in Spain? United Nations? Would they be quiet? Would Madame Bachelet think this would be normal in a country like Luxembourg? Why is it normal and acceptable for Sahrawis? Why does nobody speak up? It is impressive. It is really impressive.
Thank you, Isabel. And I see Maima raise her hand. Please go ahead.
Just if Ghalia has nothing to say. Ghalia? It's okay. You want to say something? Okay, I will speak by myself. Just I want to remind two things. Thank you very much, Isabel, for your update. Actually, there is two things we have to remind that I have in my power around 300 documents that shows how Morocco tried to corrupt the UN officials to put a blind eye on the question of Western Sahara. I am ready to share it with anyone. It's Chris Coleman who has shared this document. And it shows how these voluntary donations that Morocco gives to the Office of the High Commissioner, it's actually money to buy and to silence them from talking about the question of Western Sahara. Since the beginning of the conflict, the question of Western Sahara, there is not a simple report that has been written by the Office of the High Commissioner, except one in 2006. They have sent a mission to Sahara, and the conclusion of this report is that all the violations that are occurring in Western Sahara is because of the lack of access of the right of self-determination. This report has never seen the light. It's because of France, who has decided to keep it in silence. It's not public until today. You can find it in the page of ARSO, but it's not officially used. Morocco has prevented, Morocco and France, when I say this, has prevented the mandate of human rights to be included in the MINURSO. And they wanted to show that Morocco is open to all these procedures, like rapporteurs, to come to Western Sahara, and that Morocco is a free country, and blah, blah, blah. And actually, in 2016, the Polisario Front has wrote a letter, I have it in my power, to all the rapporteurs, telling them to respect the legal status of the territory, to not visit Western Sahara in invitation of Morocco, and that they cannot do the same thing when they are visiting USA, they cannot go to Mexico. So is the same question also in Western Sahara. So this corruption that, or these hands, let's say it's the one who have silenced the will, or if there is any kind of political will, to protect the Sahrawis. Right now, in this situation, since 2016, there is no mechanism, there is no visit coming to the territory from the office. There is no rapporteur that has come, and there is nothing credible coming from the UN to talk about the situation on Western Sahara. So the Western Sahara, let's say it's some kind of black hole in the map of the human rights. We don't know nothing about what's going on. We don't know if the people have access to vaccination. We don't know nothing about the COVID. We don't know nothing if the people are working or not. We don't know nothing how many people have access to school. So it's a responsibility of international community, and the international community represented by the UN has failed the Sahrawi peoples to be protected. So I think this is what I wanted to say, and I apologize for taking the floor.
Maima, please don't apologize. The floor is yours. Thank you, Maima. Appreciate your insight. So I have another question, and this is for everyone. This question would be direct. First question would be for Ghalia. If you can tell us a little bit more about the crackdown in the streets and the ongoing violation. And I know you mentioned this earlier in your previous comments, that the demonstration, that the Moroccan violation have doubled down since the end of the ceasefire. So could you tell us a little bit, please, about the crackdown in the streets and the ongoing violations? Thank you.
Hello. After the breaking of the ceasefire, and the collapse of the United Nations peace settlement plan on collapse November 13th, 2020, that Morocco is aiming to retaliate against Sahrawi civilians. How are pro-Western Sahara and self-determination and independence? Preventing peaceful protests, and when a demonstration is organized, the Sahrawi are separated and harassed, especially Sahrawi women who suffer in silence. They are subjected to all kinds of insults, physical assaults, and harassment. The following Sahrawis are victims of this malpractice: Mohamed Mbareck, Ghalia Lehbib نافع بوتزوفر، زكريا الرقيبي، أكرم الحنفي.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see that Isabel, you have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to add the lack of action of the International Committee for the Red Cross. The International Committee of the Red Cross has been addressed for decades now about the situation in Western Sahara. The situation in Western Sahara is nothing less than a genocide. People tend to think that a genocide is when you enter and kill everyone at once, but it's not. It has several issues, several items. All of them, except one, has been practiced by the Moroccan state in Western Sahara. It's a territory that's a non-autonomous territory, and it should be protected under international humanitarian law, which it is not. International Red Cross, Committee for the Red Cross, did so far not make an official visit. There was some talk about the visit last week, but nothing official came out. So even this is denied to the Sahrawis, the most basic right for a visit of the International Committee for the Red Cross. The same applies to the prisons. I hear sometimes in seminars people saying that the International Red Cross was not allowed to visit by Morocco. To be allowed, they needed to have first requested. They do not request. They have not requested any visit so far as I know. And it's not for lack of communication from the families, from the lawyer, from human rights organizations, from the Sahrawi diaspora, and from the Sahrawis in the occupied territories and their organizations. I want also to add, when we speak about not having legal organizations in Western Sahara, who should make them legal? The Moroccan occupier? For me, any association of the Sahrawis is legal because they constituted them. They don't need the approval of the Moroccan state. To believe that this is necessary is to accept the occupation and the occupation authority. It would be the same as to say they have to have a trade union and it has to be approved by the Moroccan states. No, the Moroccan state is an occupier, illegal occupier, like Maima explained. So the Red Cross, the role of the International Red Cross is verifying. And Peter Maurer, in a recent interview to a Spanish newspaper, said about the Western Sahara conflict that they were following up the issue with concern, which always is a very beautiful phrase, also very used in the United Nations. They all have concerns, but they never act on them. And that this would be a conflict that has still a lot of political solutions to be reached before the intervention of the International Committee. Which political solutions, I don't know, because I don't see any political solution. We have, since 1975, actually since 1973, are we waiting for a political solution that has never arrived? And there is no negotiation to be done because everything was negotiated in 1991. All the negotiations were already made. What do you want to negotiate exactly? Or do we expect that the Sahrawi decade after decade will disappear or accept Moroccan rule? That will not happen. You have to read history. So this realpolitik terminology is completely useless because the Sahrawi, and I've said it before, in 2020, in the first quarter of 2020, in each conference I said, they will go to war very soon because it's absolutely impossible to continue in this situation. It is unacceptable. It would not be acceptable anywhere. And I will say some countries, because Maima didn't want to say name countries, but I can name several countries. It would not be acceptable in Mexico. It would not be acceptable in Russia. It would not be acceptable in Greenland, in Iceland, in any European country. And it is not acceptable in Western Sahara. You cannot continue to ignore this situation. And the International Red Cross is one of the main actors that should be there. Like Maima said, we don't have any data on children. That's why I had to interview during 5 years 300 children and students between the age of 5 and 25 to reach some conclusion, some data, to produce data, because there is no data. And people ask me, how do you compare it with the data from Morocco? I cannot compare it with the data of Morocco because Western Sahara is not Morocco. Western Sahara is Western Sahara, it's not Morocco. So even in the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International reports, we have always Morocco/Western Sahara. And in some cases, they even include the refugee camps of Algeria, like Morocco/Western Sahara. This is inadmissible. It is inadmissible. It's not happening with Palestine. Nobody puts Israel/Palestine in their reports. So why do they do it with Western Sahara? I really think the international community has to look very hard on this case and to realize that the Sahrawis will not give up, that international law cannot be broken like this, because it can be if you break it in Western Sahara, tomorrow it can be your country. You cannot choose and pick from international law what you like. You have to obey international law, otherwise we are in total anarchy.
Thank you, Isabel. We have the next question will be for Ghalia. I wanted to ask, is the crackdown just against the pro-self-determination activists, or this is something that is against all the Sahrawis? And could you please provide us an example of those cases?
Yes, Sahrawis cannot establish or found their own associations, as Moroccan regime would ban any pro-self-determination association from existing. All Sahrawi associations work clandestinely and without a legal status. This proves to be slight problem when reporting or dealing with international bodies or when trying to get credibility or funds from foreign institutions or establishments.
Thank you. Maima, I saw that you have a question as well. This question is, Ghalia mentioned earlier the visit of the IRC, and I believe Isabel as well mentioned that, the visit to the IRC to the occupied Western Sahara. You mentioned earlier that the organizations visiting the occupied Western Sahara by asking for the Moroccan permission makes them complicit with the Moroccan occupation. Could you tell us a little bit more about what do you think, and do you condemn the IRC visits to the NY?
Yes, as Polisario Front, we don't condemn that the ICRC goes to the territory. What we condemn is that they have done it with the hands of the Moroccan organization. That this organization is Moroccan Red Crescent. And only the fact that they have trespassed the borders of Morocco, it's a violation of the mandate of the ICRC, because they should, if they are working with the Moroccan Red Cross, they should stick to the borders of Morocco and not Western Sahara. And the most sad thing also is that, and we are very disappointed, is that they have spent around a week in Western Sahara. They have gone almost to every city, and they didn't visit none of us, of our people who are tortured, who are under home arrest, who are suffering on a daily basis. So what my question is, I ask for all the persons who are financing the ICRC to ask questions how their money is spent. This is an illegal act, and all the citizens of the world should react and condemn this, because the Sahrawi people, if they are civilians under zone conflict, they should be protected. They should create, I mean, the RCRC should create a humanitarian passage, go and open dispensary for the people, give them food, give them whatever. And instead of that, they came with the hands of the occupier to recognize the fake sovereignty that Morocco does not have in Western Sahara. So this is very dangerous. It's an aggression to the international law, and made by the RCRC, who should be the guardian of the protection of international law. It's make it more dangerous, and we condemn it. We condemn the way that this visit has been made. And actually, we have made a lot of meetings. There is a lot of pressure to the RCRC to make them work, to make them visit the Sahrawi political prisoners. They have opened an office in Rabat or Casablanca in 2015. During 5 years, they have an office. They have never visited none the Moroccan prisoners, not the Sahrawi prisoners. And now I am asking how they can spend so much money in a fake office that is not doing their work. So we are ashamed the silence of the international community in front of the atrocities made by the RCRC and how they misspend the money of the taxpayers.
Thank you. And I have another question here for Ghalia. You have, do Sahrawi enjoy equal opportunity in Western Sahara under the Moroccan occupation?
So what's Niana?
No, I asked Ghalia. Can you need to unmute your microphone? Just give me a moment. Yeah, Ghalia, go ahead. It's yours. And mute your microphone. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Repeat question. I not.
The question is, do the Sahrawi enjoy or have equal opportunities in Western Sahara under the Moroccan occupation? This is in comparison to the other to the Moroccan settlers.
This policy of aggression that
If you allow me, while Ghalia, she's doing her question,
Yes.
Actually, the racism that Morocco authorities exercise with the Sahrawi people, it's something terrible. We, the Sahrawis, feel it in the first moment. The Sahrawis are second-hand citizens in their own land. They cannot travel, they cannot associate, they are observed, they have no liberty of freedom, access to work. They are the ones who are obliged to have work very far from their homes, to take them away from their culture, from the way of life, and to separate them, to make them some kind of brainwash from their society. So it's very dangerous. If Ghalia is there, she can speak. I think she's now okay.
All right. Ghalia, please go ahead. You're muted.
Yes. In addition to this, we mentioned the marginalization suffered by young Sahrawis in the occupied territories, namely the Sahrawi youth who are jobless, even though they have high education diplomas and are claiming their rights to live in dignity and to equal job opportunities. Usually, their demonstrations are often faced by brutal and violent crackdown.
Okay. And Isabel, I see that you do have your hands up. Please go ahead.
I wanted to add something on this. In a US report on the country reports on human rights practice for 2018, the Department of State of the United States of America stated one of the war crimes that actually is ongoing in Western Sahara. They didn't call it a war crime, but they described the war crime. The report states, as an inducement to relocate to the territory, workers in the formal sector earned up to 80% more than their counterparts in the internationally recognized Morocco. The government also provided fuel subsidy and exempted workers from income and value-added taxes. The transfer of Moroccan population into Western Sahara, the territory it occupies, is prohibited by international humanitarian law. The transfer of an occupying power's population to a territory it occupies amounts to a war crime that may engage the individual criminal responsible of those responsible. And that's relating to practice rule 130 and also to the several Geneva Convention treaties. So what we have is the occupying force occupying all the workforce because they need Moroccans in the territory to change the demographics in case there would be a referendum, which will not happen, but also to reduce the number of Sahrawis and so the force of resistance in the Moroccans' minds. But it doesn't end here. Sahrawis who are not at work, some of them have something like called a social card. I don't have the correct translation, but it's a minimum amount that allows them not to starve. So these social cards are handed out according to their behavior, to the Sahrawi behavior. If you don't behave in the norms of the Moroccan occupation law, that means that you have to hail the king, be a good Moroccan citizen, accept the occupation and so forth and so on, and never speak out, immediately this little amount is withdrawn. So we have an enormous part of the Sahrawi population in real impoverishment, and not because of lack of, like Ghalia said, not because of lack of preparation, not because they are dumb or they're lazy. No, it's just poor and simple apartheid policy. It's an apartheid policy and forced impoverishment. And this results not only in lack of opportunities in the workplace, but also in deficient health. We did not address the health issue, but Sahrawis in the occupied territories have deficient health, all of them, most of them. They don't have adequate health care. The political prisoners have no health care at all, and when they have, it's medical neglect and sometimes medical intentional malpractice. So we have like the case of Mr. Mohamed Lefkhir, who never drank a glass of wine in his life, but was for 2 years medicated with medicines related to addiction to alcohol. So you can see how they are ill-treated. But in the occupied territories, there are no medical attention for the Sahrawis unless they pay, and even if they pay, it's very, very under the normal standard that would be acceptable. And even more, since the ceasefire, they have been rejected from the hospitals. They're not even seen, like the case of Bamba Lefkhir, but also of many others. I have interviewed one child that was 9-year-old, and he was brutally tortured by the police. He broke an arm during the torture. He was went to surgery without anesthesia, the 9-year-old. So you see the compliance of the occupying state, but also of the hospital functionaries, about the medical staff. The medical staff who made the Hippocrates oath, they have, it's not because of lack of anesthesia, it's because it's a political decision. They decided to make the surgery without anesthesia. The child had to have a plaque inside his arm, the plaque infected, so they had to redraw it against without anesthesia. This child tried to commit suicide 3 times. His mother was completely frozen. She didn't know what to do, who to address. But this is an extreme case. Other cases like simple diabetes, 2-type diabetes, are not treated, or they don't have access to the medicines. They don't have enough money. So this is an apartheid regime, and it's extermination, little by little.
Thank you, Isabel. So as we near the end of the webinar, I wanted to go around, and if you have any questions, please do drop these questions in the chat, but I would like to go around and ask our panelists 2 questions. One of them is, do you have any call to action? What do you suggest we do next? The second question is, how do you see the recent so-called the US, the recognition of the so-called Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara, and how do you see, and what do you, how do you regard that in general, that move that we think should be called upon as many times as possible, and as of yet we haven't seen much from our side. We haven't seen anything from the State Department concerning what step or what the new administration might decide, but just it'll be helpful if you have any thoughts on that. And the last thing is, if you have any, if there are any resources, links, and where all the speakers, where anybody who wants to talk to you can find you, either on social media, a specific website, just how can people follow you or find more about the work you do. And last but not least, I have, there is another questions. There's one question here that dropped. This question for Ghalia says, can you also tell us a little bit about the right to live in dignity? And the last comment that was dropped by Pedro, it's saying, as you probably know, the first book on the legal issue of Western Sahara problem was published by IPGET in 2007, International Law on the Question of Western Sahara, followed by the French translation. So he is saying that we hope to have it published in about 2 months before the European Court of Justice decision. So we look forward to that. Please, if you have any questions, Pedro, feel free to send us the link, keep us updated, and we'll make sure that we post, we share it with our followers. And last but not least, I wanted to also remind everyone that just in a summary of this webinar is that the Moroccan occupation is doubling down on its violation, especially since the ceasefire. There are a couple of cases that are being currently that the world attention is starting to get focusing on. For example, looking at the Sultana Khaya and her house arrest. And another point that I have here is that the political prisoners continue to go or undergo horrible conditions and mistreatment despite or harsh sentences. And the other point I have also is the lack of the international community action. All of the speakers mentioned the Red Cross lack of action, which shows the how complicit an organization, a large organization such as the Red Cross organization in the occupied territory of Western Sahara. 1, by failing to visit the territory, and 2, by failing to visit the main victims of the Moroccan occupation. And one of the call to action is either report and follow your own mission, or your work in Western Sahara is practically baseless, and it makes you a complicit with the Moroccan occupation. Western Sahara is not part of Morocco. It was never part of Morocco. It was occupied and continued to be brutally occupied by Moroccan regime. The Sahrawi people under the Moroccan occupation continue to lack the basic human rights, including the right for demonstration, assembly, and reporting. And the victims of the occupation and the Moroccan aggressions are not just activists. They are women, there are children, elders. And one last point I also have is that the plunder of natural resources continue regardless of the realities on the ground. So please, like I mentioned, I'd like to ask everyone to comment on this, on the topic of the U.S. recognition of the so-called sovereignty over Western Sahara. If you have anything to comment on that. And then there is one last question, Isabel, the situation of the Sahrawi student in the occupied territory and the Moroccan University, if you can comment on that as well. Thank you. Isabel, you can go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, so I can refer to my report. I think you can put it in the link. But the situation of the students and the pupils in Western Sahara and occupied territories, Western Sahara, is the one of an apartheid regime. It's not a situation where you have a different set of studies and curricula, like the Bantum system in South Africa during the apartheid. The children are not in separate schools, they're all in the same classroom. But that makes it, for me, even worse from a psychological point of view. The children are humiliated, Sahrawi children are humiliated not only by their teachers, but also by their peers. So they are, they hear from, as soon as they go to school, from 5, 6 years old, they hear that they are less intelligent, that they are dumber, that they are worthless. Their fathers and their mothers are insulted. They are forced to sing a national anthem that's not theirs. They have to force to sing the Moroccan anthem. They are beaten, they are ill-treated, and they are called stupid. If they make any question during class, they are insulted. So this kind of trauma in a child hangs on for the rest of their lives. And I think the situation is not worse because of the very loving environment they have at home, and because the Sahrawi families value as much the girls as the boys and incentivize them to study, even under these conditions. So we have then the other situation that is in the occupied territories. There are no universities except one private one, which is not affordable for the Sahrawis, of course. So they have to go to Marrakesh, Agadir, Rabat, and so on and so on. What happens there? They are still under surveillance. They are still being harassed. They have enormous difficulties to find a place to sleep. Nobody wants to rent apartments to Sahrawi students because they know they will be constantly under police surveillance, and also sometimes they make raids to the Sahrawi students' houses, not because they commit any crimes, but because they try to raise awareness among the other students about the situation as Sahrawis. And I had the opportunities to live with some of them in different cities, in Rabat, in Agadir, and in Marrakesh. So the very difficult situation in which they have to learn, in which they have to study, and the harassment they are victims of. And it seems to me, and also I have to mention that they are not allowed to study whatever they want. There are some classes, there are not some curricula, they are not access to. There is not an official ban, but there is an unofficial ban. So it's, in fact, they are not allowed to study things like medicine, aeronautics, chemistry, physics, and so on. In the occupied territories, when they come back, they are unemployed. If they stay in Morocco, they are unemployed. So again, the apartheid situation. The self-worth of the Sahrawi is deeply affected with this policy. However, they transform this attack on their self-worth into action and into resistance. And I noticed during the study I made, the children were more frustrated, had more trauma, more anger, and more fear than the students, the ones that were actually older. Why? Because the older ones could put their anger, their fear, their humiliation into practice of resistance. So this should be a concern to the UNICEF. It should be a concern to Miss Madame Bachelet, but it's not. It should be a concern to people all over the world who like Save the Children, and all these organizations, which are simply not interested. I sent my report to all of them. To the US recognition. I just want to say, for me, there is no US recognition. For me, there was a Trump recognition. There was a tweet, and there was a statement. But to have a recognition from a state on an issue like that, which is actually illegal because the UN has this power, not the United States. It would be completely unilateral and against international law. But there was no US recognition. There was a recognition by Mr. Trump through a tweet. And we're not going into details about the tweets of Mr. Trump and their validities. And then we had a statement made by Mr. Trump. So it was not approved anywhere. There was no recognition. I believe Mr. Biden will not say anything. And so the case continues like before. No recognition, but no bad blood with Israelis and Moroccans. But that is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And where do you think, where can everyone find you or follow you? I know you are on Twitter. I know you have an academia page, and I'll share that here where you have where you have published all of your. I think it's academia. Yeah, I'll share your document. But if you have any links that you'd like people to follow, please drop them in the chat.
Follow Puron Sahara Libre. It's a website that's published in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and it has also reports from other people and from other organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ghalia, I see that you raised your hand. Please go ahead and mute yourself and go ahead. Thank you.
Yes. Despite that, plundering and illegally exploiting the natural resources of Western Sahara is another violation of Sahrawi rights. Morocco impoverishes Sahrawis while settlers are benefiting. Sahrawis are forced to live in exile in diaspora or under occupation without the hope of enjoying their right to benefit from their diverse natural resources. Natural resources Sahrawis are overpowered by settlers. Also, Morocco prevents Sahrawi students from the right of wearing their own Sahrawi dress at schools. Moreover, there is this attack on the Sahrawi identity in an attempt of assimilation.
Thank you, Ghalia, and that's you brought a very important point, and that's I always like to mention that the Moroccanization project of Western Sahara has been an ongoing project since 1975, and that's include preventing the Sahrawis from practicing their own cultural ceremonies, trying to suppress the people of Western Sahara identity, preventing the Sahrawi people from wearing their own customs, their own dara'a, malhfa, and all of the symbols that symbolizes the people of Western Sahara. Thank you very much for your insight, and we will share all the links in the chat. So if you can, Ghalia, share with us the link to the website of your organization, we will share it with everyone here as well. And then I see Isabel, I see your hand is up as well. I don't know if that's, do you have any? Please go ahead if you have anything to add. Okay, so Maima, it will be your turn. If you have anything to add, please mute yourself and tell us.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that the Sahrawi people are not an exception in how the Western world has always been with the occupier. Remember the case of Timor-Leste, when they were trying to, Pedro is a witness here, when they were trying to negotiate their independence and when they're in peace process, USA has supported Indonesia in their occupation. Also, USA has supported apartheid. When I say USA, I say Western world. So we are not an exception. It's very normal that we can see this kind of dealings. But there is something very important, is that even if the entire world open a consulate in Western Sahara in violation of international law, if the entire world recognize the sovereignty of Morocco on Western Sahara, it will remain illegal. And Morocco will have no sovereignty in Western Sahara until the people of Western Sahara decided freely and transparently and democratically. So dream whatever you want to dream, buy whatever you want to buy, corrupt whatever you want to corrupt, blackmail what you want to blackmail, because this is the result of the blackmail of the Moroccan policy, not only with the Africans who corrupted their leaders, but also with the Europeans by the blackmail, terrorism, immigration, and all that. So they have no sovereignty in Western Sahara until the Sahrawi people are allowed to exercise this decision. So right now, Morocco is a thief, it's an occupier. They have no sovereignty to apply their law in Western Sahara. It's illegal. We invite all Sahrawis to be more vocal, to protest, and to stay away from the fear, and that we are the only ones, Sahrawis, who are going to achieve any change on the ground. We are the Sahrawis. Of course, with the international solidarity, our path to freedom will be shorter. And thanks to the solidarity, also we have survived. Remember that the half of the Sahrawi population are in exile for 14 years, for more than 14 years, living and depending 100% from the international help. So the international solidarity is still needed. We need more solidarity, we need more support to achieve, but Sahrawis are the one who have the battle in their hands. They should really be more vocal, to protest, to go, to denounce, to do whatever they can. And they should also encourage themselves in the question of fighting for freedom. So we are all concerned, because all of us, we have some kind of persons who has been victim of this occupation. We have our families who are in exile. We have our families who are under occupation. So we are concerned and we have to keep fighting. My other question is the question of our side. I invite all organizations to join our group in Geneva. It's called Geneva for Human Rights in Western Sahara. We have two groups, we have states and we have organizations. We need more support from organizations who have ECOSOC or don't have ECOSOC, doesn't matter. We really want to gather strong organizations who will be more vocal in the forums, especially in the UN, in New York, in Geneva, in Vienna, in Roma. So the places when we have to make the voice of the Sahrawi people heard. So we need your support. Please sign. I put the sites in your chat. Sign, join, talk with your neighbors, talk with the organizations. We don't care if they are political or not political or humanitarian. We just need their support. We can't hear you.
Thank you, Maima. We appreciate your intervention. So I did share the website that you and your team are working tirelessly to get as many volunteers and people who share the same vision and the website is the Geneva for Western Sahara.org. Please visit that site. If you have any questions, reach out to us and we will put you in touch with Maima. So for the sake of time, we are 10 minutes more than the time that we reserved for this webinar. I wanted to, excuse me, have a closing notes just to remind everyone in this webinar that we do have future webinars and we appreciate your time. We appreciate your dedication for supporting the people of Western Sahara. And I would like to just last note is, if you would like to learn more and stay up to date on Western Sahara and the Sahrawi Association in the US work, as well as if you'd like to be invited for future webinars, please don't hesitate to subscribe to our newsletter. Once again, I thank all our distinguished speakers and their time, and I'd like to also to thank everyone for their time for attending. And I just saw a question right before the closing. I saw that Pedro, Pedro, you raised your hand. Do you have any question? Would you like to? I give you the floor, and then I will conclude this. I will conclude the webinar, but I would have to stop recording as well as soon as possible, so we don't go outside the limit. Thank you. Let me see. Pedro, please go ahead. I think you are muted.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to add something on what was said by Isabel. The question of genocide is the problem with the question of genocide is that of course you can have a lot of acts who are included in definition of genocide, but there's also a subjective aspect, and it is the intent to destroy in this case the people, and not only the fact that there are killings or all the other actions, also the intention. And it's very difficult. Of course, you can speak of genocide in general, but the legal aspect of genocide has to have this particular question of intention. But I do believe that is genocide what's happening not only in Timor, but in Western Sahara as well. In Timor, the number of killings, of course, was much bigger than the one in Western Sahara. But anyway, the need to certify that is genocide can be used by the so-called cultural genocide. It's not included in the definition of genocide. In the preparations, yes, it was included, but then they decided not to have it there. But if you see that what Morocco is doing with the question of names, the question of the Moroccanization of the population, and even the fact that they bring, and of course they overpopulate the region with Moroccans being now the Sahrawis a minority in their own country, that cultural genocide, even if it is not included in the definition of genocide, can be used as a proof that it is a question of genocide, what's happening in the territory. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Appreciate your insight. And again, thank you everyone who joined us today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and you can find more information, and you could also subscribe to our newsletter at sahrawiusa.com/events. Please follow us on social media. on Facebook, it will be Sahrawi USA. On Twitter, it will be Sahrawi USA 1, since our first one got blocked somehow. But thank you all. Thank you everyone who joined. Thank you for our distinguished panelists, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.